Well, earlier we reported on the latest briefing by the Electricity Minister, Dr. Kgosientsho Ramokgopa, who believes the situation as far as dealing with power cuts in the country is improving. He also lamented the fact that increasing heat, or rather the warming up of temperatures, as would happen at this time of year, may cause an issue with some of the power stations. Let's talk more about that update. Monique, who's with the Center for Renewable and Sustainable Energy Studies at Stellenbosch University. Stellenbosch University, excuse me. A very good evening to you, Monique. Good to have you on the program tonight. So let's talk about the issue of these warmer temperatures and how that might make it difficult to run some of the units in the country. Is that far-fetched?
No, we have seen that in the past, so that could very much translate into more units having more breakdowns. We typically, around this time of year, after coming out of winter, we have, for the last 5 or 6 years, seen a trend where the energy availability factor goes down. So we're probably expecting the same for this year, that we'll see a lower energy availability factor in the second half of the year when temperatures are warmer. Also in Eskom, it's probably going to start running close to getting low diesel supplies, and they might not be able to run their diesels as high as they are at the moment.
So we all understand why winter is a problem for Eskom, because the colder it gets, the more people need heat, need to plug in. Some people say they will cook more meals because whatever, it's more comforting, etc. So there's an increase in the use of electricity as a result of what happens in our homes. But as far as the warmer weather is concerned, why is that a problem, for example, for the running of stations such as Matimba?
So the reasoning behind this, and I'm not a coal-powered station expert, just what Eskom and government have been saying is that when there are warmer temperatures, the units, because there are thermal units, have more breakdowns because they're running at higher temperatures, whereas if the ambient temperature is lower, it physically makes it easier to run these stations. We also know summer months, when the northern part of the country have the rainy season, they also often struggle with wet coal. So we're hoping that this year around that they won't have those problems, because that's definitely going to affect the load shedding schedules and the levels of load shedding that we are seeing.
And the minister is still, months later, quite encouraged by this apparent progress that he says is being made in remedying the energy crisis. But is it consistent progress? Because it certainly doesn't feel that way when every once in a while you're sent back to stage 6 power cuts.
So our analysis of the power system, and we've done extensive research into the energy availability factor and tracking it over a couple of years, and we haven't seen a consistent increase in Eskom having their units available to generate power. So I think from our side, we would probably say that we haven't seen that consistent increase in the energy availability factor, an increase in the stations becoming more available, and us expecting probably that we're not going to see lower levels of load shedding into the future. I think probably when Kusile units 1, 2 and 3 and the 4th units are back online, we will probably see a bit of a dip then and should experience lower levels of load shedding if the other stations remain at the level that they are currently, and if they don't encounter any additional problems at Kusile, which is very much on the cards still.
We've got some power coming online from Kusile, I think, by the end of today, about 800 megawatts, correct me if I'm wrong. We're also expecting Unit 5 to come online by the end of December this year, according to Minister Ramokgopa. How much of a difference will that make in changing the country's fortunes where load shedding is concerned in the coming months and indeed going into the new year?
So yes, that's definitely, we're expecting that to make a difference, and I think everyone, Eskom and government, is solving their best just to get those units back online, because one unit at Kusile, as you correctly said, is 800 megawatts, and that's almost one stage of load shedding. So for every unit at Kusile that comes back online, we could mitigate one stage of load shedding, which is really nice and does make a significant difference. And if we've got 3 to 4 units back at Kgosientsho, we're looking at about 3,000 to 4,000 megawatts additional to the system. So that immediately slashes load shedding by 3 to 4 stages, which is great.
But we can't talk, Monique, about Kgosientsho without reflecting on the fact that had construction been finished in time and had construction been done properly, we would have been far ahead in dealing with this crisis, would we have not? Because they're behind by several years.
Absolutely. I mean, construction at Kusile already started in 2008, and they were supposed to be finished by 2014. We're now in 2023, 2024, almost 10 years later than which they said the Kgosientsho station should be finished. So yes, absolutely, it is something that should be lamented, because they shouldn't have had these design problems. They shouldn't have sat with so many units out at this present time. And we also know that the cost has ballooned from 81 billion rand that was initially projected to 233 billion rand, which is currently standing at. So I think probably all in all, Kgosientsho is not something that they should be proud of.
One of the other concerns, though, where Kgosientsho is concerned, helpful as it's going to be, is that there's the issue of the exemptions, which are due to come to an end around early 2025. Those would affect Kgosientsho units 1, 2, and 3. Do you see a scenario in which, at this stage, those exemptions would not be, shall we say, extended or renewed?
So it's very difficult to say. Everyone was probably expecting that they would get those exemptions now, because the fact remains that if they don't give those exemptions, we would see very high levels of load shedding. And I think everyone, including government, including the departments of fisheries and forestry, who gave those exemptions, are eager to see lower levels of load shedding, because the impact to the economy is just huge, and that has got a detrimental impact on a lot of people, on livelihoods, on businesses, which really filters down to the whole of South Africa. So it's really a very difficult balancing act for them to pull through, in terms of mitigating the impact to the economy, but then also looking at what they're doing to the environment and the poisonous gases that are being released by those stations. So lots of provinces by Eskom that they will try and mitigate that they will make plans before 2025 when those exemptions lapse. So we're looking at what they're going to do and how they're going to mitigate that. But I probably would foresee that if they're not able to mitigate against it, that they would get an exemption, because I can't see them allowing those big high levels of load shedding and the impact that has on the economy.
And for everyone listening who's not too sure what exemptions we're talking about, these would be emissions exemptions for units 1, 2, and 3 at Kgosientsho. Lastly, Monique, when you look at where we are currently and the issue of the exemptions that now have to be granted around the issue of emissions, there's a big push globally to bring down emissions across sectors in the world. South Africa has already said that ultimately it believes in a viable energy mix where we still use, for example, coal, but are bringing in renewables and other cleaner forms of energy. How much longer do you think we can sustain this? Will we need to sustain this?
So yes, it will also put South Africa in a very difficult situation, because we largely still reliant on coal-fired power stations. During this year and last year, 70+% of our electricity was generated from coal-fired power stations. And the fact remains is we won't be able to displace or replace that amount of generation quickly by renewables. We've seen a great increase in renewables on the grid, but we've run into grid problems. So it's just going to become increasingly difficult to put renewables onto our grid. So I think probably for the foreseeable future we'll have to rely on coal-fired power stations, and it's going to be interesting to see what government will allow and how much pushback there will be from the international community and from environmental groups in terms of putting legislation in place to force Eskom to put more renewables on the grid. So I think then the question remains at this stage what's going to happen. I think in our projection it is going to be difficult to replace a significant amount of our coal-fired power stations with renewables. But there will obviously be some pressure on Eskom, and I also think it's going to be difficult for Eskom to commit to the coal decommissioning schedule that they've put in place, because that will mean at this stage higher stages of load shedding, and that's something that no one wants to see. So yeah, it's going to be interesting to see what happens in future.
Monique Roux, good to speak to you. Monique is with the Centre for Renewable and Sustainable Energy Studies at Stellenbosch University.